The desert stretched out like an endless sheet of gold and rust, shimmering in the dying light of the sun. The air was heavy, dry, and unforgiving, and each gust of wind seemed to lift the dust just enough to sting her eyes and scrape her throat raw. She stumbled once, then again, her knees threatening to give out beneath her. Her boots, once sturdy, now felt like anchors dragging her deeper into exhaustion. Every step was a war, and each breath a painful reminder that the body has limits. Finally, she slowed to a stop, her chest heaving as though the air itself had turned to fire. I cannot walk any further, she said at last, her voice soft but broken, the words tumbling out almost like a confession. She hated admitting weakness, hated showing that she had been beaten down by the elements, but she could not deny it anymore. Her legs trembled under her, and for a terrifying moment she thought she might collapse right there on the dirt track that cut through the barren land. The cowboy had been walking a few paces ahead, silent and steady, his broad frame outlined by the sinking sun. He stopped when he heard her, turning slowly, as if measuring her words before responding. His hat cast a long shadow across his face, but his eyes, sharp, unwavering, and carrying the weight of someone who had seen hardship before, caught the last rays of light. He didn't say anything at first, didn't rush to reassure or scold. He just stood there, studying her, letting the silence stretch between them until the desert wind whistled through like a restless spirit. Her heart hammered. She feared he would tell her to push on, to grit her teeth and keep moving, because wasn't that what cowboys always did? Push through, endure, keep marching no matter the odds. But instead, he walked back toward her, his spurs clicking faintly with each step, his boots sending up small clouds of dust that curled in the fading glow. The closer he came, the smaller she felt. Not because of weakness, but because of the sheer steadiness in him, the way his presence filled the empty space around them. She looked away, ashamed of her confession, ashamed of the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "You've come a long way," he said finally, his voice low, steady, a voice that carried both comfort and command. "A body can only take so much." The words caught her off guard. She had expected impatience, maybe even frustration, but not this quiet acknowledgement of her struggle. Her lips parted, but no words came. What could she say? That she wanted to be strong, but the desert had stripped her pride away grain by grain. That she was afraid if she stopped now, she would never stand again. The cowboy stopped in front of her, boots planted firm in the dirt, and tilted his head slightly as if he could read every thought etched across her weary face. He didn't reach for her right away. He didn't touch her or force her to move. He just let her breathe, let her feel the weight of the silence between them. The horizon behind him was painted in streaks of orange and crimson, a sky so wide it swallowed everything in its path. She thought about how small she was against it, how endless the desert seemed, and how easily a person could be lost in both. Her knees buckled slightly, and she caught herself on her own thigh, trying to stand a little straighter, to prove to him, and to herself, that she wasn't completely defeated. But her voice betrayed her again. "I can't," she whispered, the words cracking under the weight of her exhaustion. Something shifted in his expression then, though it was subtle. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and for the first time since she had spoken, he moved closer with purpose. The air between them felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. She dared to glance up at him, meeting his gaze fully now, and what she saw there stilled her breath. There was no judgment, no annoyance, only a deep, unwavering steadiness, as if he had already decided she would not be left behind. For a moment, the desert fell away, the harsh winds, the biting dust, the endless miles ahead, all of it dimmed against the quiet strength of his presence. She had said she could not walk any further, and though the words had felt like an ending, his eyes told her it was not. He tipped his hat back slightly, the brim catching the last sliver of sunlight. "Then you won't," he said simply. The promise in those words wrapped around her like a blanket against the cold, and for the first time since the journey began, she let herself believe she wouldn't be alone in this fight. Before she could form another protest, the cowboy bent low and scooped her into his arms in one smooth, unhesitating motion. The world shifted around her, the ground, the cruel dirt that had punished every step she'd taken, fell away. She gasped as her body rose, her arms instinctively circling his neck for balance, her cheek brushing against the coarse fabric of his shirt. It smelled faintly of leather, horse sweat, and dust, but beneath all that was something steadying, something undeniably him. She wasn't light, she knew that, and shame pricked at the edges of her exhaustion, but he carried her as though the weight didn't matter. His arms were strong, one cradling her back, the other securing her legs against his side. His steps didn't falter, they were steady, purposeful, echoing with a rhythm that made her heart fall in sync with his stride. The desert had no mercy, but somehow his presence felt like defiance against it. Her lips parted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You shouldn't, I'm too heavy. You'll wear yourself out." He didn't answer right away. His head remained bowed slightly, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. The only sound was the crunch of his boots pressing into the dirt and the faint whisper of wind dragging across the empty land. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her. Then, with a quiet confidence that brooked no argument, he said, "Darlin', I've carried heavier burdens. Don't you worry none." Something about the way he said it made her throat tighten. He wasn't only talking about her weight, she felt it. He meant burdens of another kind. Battles fought, losses endured, maybe even ghosts of the past that still walked beside him. And now, without hesitation, he had added her to whatever he carried. She rested her head against his chest, listening. The steady thrum of his heartbeat was a reassurance in itself, strong and unwavering. Each beat reminded her that while her body had failed her, his hadn't. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself be guided by the rhythm of his stride, by the sense that for once she could surrender, just a little, without the world collapsing in on her. The desert stretched on, endless and unkind. Dust clung to his boots, rose in small spirals with each step, and drifted lazily into the fading light. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the subtle strain in the way his arms held her, but he never adjusted his grip, never shifted her as though she were a nuisance. It was as if he had chosen this, chosen her, and that was final. She lifted her gaze, studying him in the slanting light. His jaw was set firm, his lips drawn into a line of determination. His skin was brown from years of sun, lined at the edges from squinting against its glare. And though she couldn't see his eyes clearly beneath the shadow of his hat, she knew without doubt they were fixed forward, unblinking, locked on some point beyond the horizon where safety lay. "You don't have to do this," she whispered again, her voice faint, almost carried away by the wind. This time, he glanced down. Just a flicker, but it was enough to meet her eyes, and in that glance was an answer stronger than words. She thought he might say something sharp, something to end her protests once and for all. Instead, his mouth curved just slightly, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Ain't about having to, it's about wanting to." The words hit her harder than she expected. Her breath caught, and suddenly the weight of her exhaustion wasn't the heaviest thing pressing on her chest anymore. She turned her face slightly, hiding against his shoulder, not trusting herself to respond. The sky above them was shifting, the fiery hues of sunset fading into deep indigo. Stars would soon scatter across the heavens, cold and distant. The land around them grew quieter, as if even the desert creatures had gone still, watching this lone figure cut across the earth with a woman in his arms. She felt every sway of his stride, the strength in the way he carried her as though she was precious cargo, not a burden. The silence between them was no longer sharp or awkward, it was full, rich, almost sacred. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around you like a cloak, steadying you even when words failed. Her fingers loosened against his shirt, not because she was stronger but because she trusted him not to falter. She had said she could not walk any further, and she had meant it. But now, cradled against him, she realized the journey wasn't over. He was carrying both of them through it, and in that realization came an unexpected comfort: she wasn't alone anymore. The horizon stretched ahead like a painted promise, glowing with the last embers of twilight. The desert's cruel heat was easing now, giving way to a night chill that slipped quietly across the sand. Stars began to prick through the deepening indigo sky, faint at first, then stronger, until it felt as though an entire river of silver light was spilling overhead. She lay cradled in his arms, the steady sway of his stride rocking her almost like a lullaby. Her body had long since given out, but her mind drifted between exhaustion and wonder. It amazed her that he hadn't faltered. His boots struck the ground with the same measured rhythm as when he first lifted her, his breathing deep and even, only occasionally marked by a quiet grunt when the terrain shifted underfoot. She had spent most of her life believing she had to fight every battle alone. To need someone else was weakness. To lean on someone was dangerous, it meant handing over a piece of yourself that could be dropped, discarded, or forgotten. But here, in this vast and merciless desert, she found herself leaning completely into him, both physically and in a way that went deeper than she dared admit. Her voice broke the silence, fragile as glass. "I'm not worth this trouble." The cowboy didn't stop walking, didn't loosen his hold. His head dipped slightly so the brim of his hat cast a shadow over her face, but his voice came low and steady, carrying more weight than the wind itself. "That's where you're wrong." The simplicity of his answer cut through her like a blade. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself or try to convince her with grand words. He simply stated it as fact, as if there was no room in the world for her doubts. And in his tone was something she couldn't ignore, conviction. Her throat tightened, and she pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. She thought of all the times she had dragged herself forward alone, all the times she had whispered into the darkness that she couldn't keep going, only to force herself up. Anyway, because no one else was there to catch her. Now, for the first time, someone had heard her confession and answered not with scorn, but with strength. The desert night grew colder, the kind of chill that seeped into the bones, but he never shifted her to protect himself. Instead, he adjusted his coat, pulling it slightly around her so the edge of its warmth fell across her shoulders. She felt the brush of worn leather against her skin, smelled the faint trace of tobacco and earth that clung to him, and the gesture nearly undid her. "You don't have to," she whispered again, though her voice was little more than a tremor. This time, he looked down at her fully. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, caught the faint light of the stars. They were darker than she'd imagined, steady and unwavering, and for a moment she forgot about the desert, about her exhaustion, about everything except the weight of his gaze. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, wry and almost tender. "Darlin', I reckon I do." The words struck her harder than she expected. They weren't spoken with obligation. They weren't the words of a man who carried her out of duty or pity. They were a vow, quiet but unbreakable, carved into the night with more permanence than stone. Her chest ached with something she didn't have a name for. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't from exhaustion anymore. They were from the raw truth of being seen, of being chosen, when she felt at her weakest. The tears slipped silently down her cheeks, vanishing into the fabric of his shirt. He didn't comment on them. He didn't call attention to her breaking. He simply carried her on, step after step, as though the tears were nothing to be ashamed of, as though the act of carrying her was enough to say everything words could not. The desert stretched on, but now the vastness of it didn't terrify her. The stars overhead felt less like cold, distant fires and more like witnesses to something sacred unfolding beneath them. She realized she was no longer afraid of being a burden. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest completely, to believe that someone else could bear the weight when she could not. She whispered, almost too softly to be heard, "Thank you." The cowboy's gaze flicked down again, and though he didn't speak this time, his expression softened in a way that told her everything she needed to know. He would carry her as far as he had to. Through dust, through dark, through whatever lay ahead. Not because he was bound to, but because he wanted to. And so, beneath the endless sweep of desert night, with stars burning like eternal lanterns overhead, he carried her forward, not as a burden, but as a promise.